5 Apache girls hiding in the barn. Please don't capture us, they pleaded to the ranch owner. The sun had just begun to climb above the desert horizon, casting long, orange shadows across the dry, dusty land. The air was hot and heavy, carrying the faint scent of sagebrush and sand. 5 young Apache girls ran as fast as their tired legs would carry them, their small feet kicking up clouds of dust with every desperate step. Their clothes were torn from the thorns and brush they had passed through, and their hair, tangled and wild, stuck to their sweat-streaked faces. Fear pulsed in every heartbeat, a constant drum reminding them that soldiers were pursuing them. Their village had been attacked, their homes taken, and the world they knew had been shattered in a single terrifying night. They were sisters in courage, though not all by blood. They had become a unit of survival, bound together by fear, hope, and determination. The eldest, 14-year-old Ayana, led the group. Her eyes, wide with both fear and resolve, scanned the horizon for any sign of danger. She had learned to move quietly and think quickly, lessons passed down from her mother before she had been taken away. Behind her, little Njoni, only 9, stumbled repeatedly over rocks and dry roots, but the others caught her hand each time and pulled her forward. Their small group moved like a single living thing, each girl sensing the emotions and struggles of the others. As they ran, the sounds of pursuit seemed to echo in the wind. The distant clatter of horse hooves, the shouted commands of soldiers, and the occasional bark of a dog grew louder with every mile they traveled. The girls whispered to each other, using soft words to remind themselves to stay quiet and calm. "We must keep moving," Ayana said, her voice trembling but firm. "If we stop now, they will find us." The others nodded, their small faces etched with determination, though their eyes betrayed their fear. Every step was heavy with exhaustion, yet no one dared to slow down. Hours passed, and the sun rose higher, making the desert seem endless. They searched desperately for shelter, any place that could hide them from view. Rocks and low shrubs offered little protection, and the open desert seemed to stretch forever in every direction. Their bodies ached, and their throats were parched, but the thought of capture kept them moving. Finally, just as their energy was reaching the breaking point, they spotted a small structure in the distance. It was a barn, old and weathered, standing alone at the edge of a small ranch. Its wooden planks were faded by years of sun and wind, and the door hung slightly crooked on rusty hinges. Hope surged in their hearts. The girls approached the barn cautiously, knowing that it might offer safety or danger. Every sound of movement made them jump, every breeze seemed to carry the possibility of discovery. When they finally pushed open the door, it creaked loudly, and for a moment the girls froze, their hearts pounding so hard it felt as if it would burst from their chests. Inside, the barn smelled of hay and animals, a mix of warmth and dust that was strangely comforting. They slipped inside, pressing themselves against the walls, grateful for the shade and cover it provided. Once inside, they allowed themselves a moment to breathe. The barn was large enough for them to hide in a corner, and stacks of hay bales offered places to curl up. Gianna led them to a small pile in the back, where they could see the door without being seen. "Stay quiet," she whispered. "They might come here, we must be ready." The other girls nodded, clutching each other's hands tightly. Fear still pulsed in their veins, but in the shadow of the barn, they felt the tiniest spark of safety. They shared what little food and water they had left, each bite taken slowly, carefully, so it would last. They spoke in whispers, telling stories to keep their minds from sinking into despair. Njoni, the youngest, began to hum a quiet tune her mother used to sing, and the sound, soft and trembling, filled the empty barn. For a moment, the harshness of the outside world seemed to vanish, replaced by the fragile warmth of companionship. The girls leaned on each other, finding strength in their unity. As the day wore on, the barn became their temporary refuge. They explored cautiously, checking for hidden dangers, listening to the sounds outside. Occasionally, a bird would flutter past an open window and the girls would hold their breath, afraid it might signal discovery. They whispered plans to each other, discussing where they might go if they were forced to leave again. Each girl had her own story, her own reasons for running, yet all shared the same urgent need to survive. Memories of their village haunted them. They remembered the laughter of children, the smell of cooking fires, and the songs their families had sung. But those memories now mingled with fear, and the reality of loss weighed heavily on their young shoulders. Still, they refused to give up. Every step taken to escape had been a choice, and now, hiding in the barn, they felt the first fragile sense of possibility. Maybe they could survive. Maybe they could find a safe place. Night approached slowly, the desert sky shifting from orange to deep purple. The girls huddled closer together, sharing warmth and whispering prayers. Stars appeared one by one, twinkling faintly through cracks in the barn walls. They imagined their families among the stars, watching over them, hoping for their safety. Gianna kept watch near the door, listening to the wind and the sounds of the night. She felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her young shoulders, but she also felt determination, a fierce will to protect the younger girls. Inside the barn, the girls began to relax just enough to sleep, their exhaustion finally overtaking fear. Each took turns keeping watch, though it was difficult to stay alert after a day filled with running and anxiety. The barn, though simple and dusty, offered them a sanctuary. They felt hidden, almost invisible, and for the first time in many days they allowed themselves a brief rest. In their dreams they imagined fields of green, running without fear, their families safe and smiling. The night was long, and the sounds of the desert were unfamiliar yet strangely comforting. The creak of the barn doors, the rustle of hay, and the distant call of animals blended together, creating a rhythm that reminded the girls that life continued outside their fear. They held each other close, whispering encouragements and sharing hope. Even in the darkest moments, they found strength in companionship, knowing that together they could face whatever came next. By morning, the desert was alive with the soft light of dawn. The girls awoke slowly, stiff from sleeping on the hard floor but determined to move forward. They had survived the first night, hidden from those who sought to capture them. Their spirits, though weary, were not broken. The barn had given them a chance to breathe, to gather their strength, and to prepare for whatever challenges lay ahead. Iana looked at the girls and smiled faintly, a small spark of hope shining in her eyes. As they prepared to leave the safety of the barn, they knew the journey would not get any easier. Danger still lurked in every shadow, and the world outside was vast and unforgiving. But they had found a place to rest, to gather courage, and to remind themselves of the strength they carried within. Together, they stepped into the desert once more, hearts pounding, legs tired, yet filled with determination. They were not just 5 girls running from fear, they were survivors, and their story had only just begun. The desert stretched out before them, endless and challenging, but with each step, they moved closer to hope. Every rustle of leaves, every whisper of wind, reminded them to stay vigilant, to stay strong, and to trust in each other. Though the journey was far from over, the barn had given them something precious. The first taste of safety, a reminder that even in a world full of danger, kindness and courage could still be found. The girls stayed in the barn, their small bodies pressed close together, trying to catch their breath after the long, exhausting flight across the desert. Their hearts still pounded from fear, and their minds were spinning with uncertainty. They had survived the first day, but the thought of what might come next loomed over them like a dark cloud. Even in the quiet of the barn, every sound, the rustle of the wind, the distant cry of a coyote, made them flinch. They had learned that danger could come from any direction at any moment, and it was better to be ready. Suddenly, a sound startled them. The barn door creaked open and light spilled across the dusty floor. The girls froze, their eyes wide with panic. Their first thought was that soldiers had found them, that their brief moment of safety was over. They huddled together, trying to make themselves as small and invisible as possible, holding their breath and praying that whoever had entered would not notice them. Then a voice spoke. It was calm and gentle, yet carried authority. "Hello, is anyone in here?" The girls looked at each other, uncertain. Their instincts screamed to hide, to run again, but they were too exhausted to move. Finally, the eldest, Ayana, took a small step forward, her voice trembling as she answered, We are here. Please don't take us." The man who had entered stepped closer, his eyes scanning the barn carefully but with no sign of aggression. He was tall and strong, with a weathered face that suggested years of hard work under the sun. His clothing was simple, a shirt and pants that had seen many days of labor, but his expression was gentle. He lowered himself slightly, trying not to appear threatening. "I won't hurt you," he said. "Why are you out here all alone?" The girls exchanged glances. It was hard to trust anyone after everything they had been through. Soldiers had taken their families and strangers had shown no mercy, but this man seemed different. There was a softness in his voice that reminded them faintly of the adults they loved and had lost. Nijoni, the youngest, clutched Ayana's hand and whispered, "Do you think we can trust him?" Ayana hesitated, looking at the man's calm eyes, then nodded ever so slightly. "We have no choice," she whispered back. With trembling voices, they began to tell their story. They spoke of their village, once filled with laughter, music, and life. They spoke of the night it had been taken, of soldiers riding in with shouting and weapons, and of families torn apart. Each word was heavy with pain, but the man listened without interruption, his face showing understanding and concern. The girls felt a strange sense of relief just to be heard, as if sharing their story could somehow lessen the fear and sorrow that weighed on them. One by one, the girls pleaded, "Please, don't capture us," one whispered, tears streaking her dirty cheeks. "We have nowhere else to go, we just want to live in peace." Another added, "We only want to be safe, we don't want to hurt anyone." Their voices were small, yet filled with desperate honesty. The man's eyes softened even more as he listened. He understood the raw fear behind their words and recognized the innocence that still shone through despite all they had suffered. The man introduced himself as Mr. Callahan, the owner of the ranch. He had lived in the desert all his life, understanding the harshness of the land and the dangers it held. He had seen people suffer before, but never had he encountered children who had fled so far and endured so much. He could feel their courage and determination, and it stirred something deep inside him. Protecting them would be risky, but he realized that turning them away would be cruel. The girls needed someone to care for them, even for a short time, and he could not ignore that need. He walked slowly into the barn, keeping his movements calm to avoid frightening them. "I can help you," he said, "but you must trust me and follow my rules. The world outside is dangerous, and we have to be careful." The girls nodded, relief washing over their faces. For the first time since leaving their village, they felt a spark of hope. Perhaps there was still goodness in the world, and perhaps someone could help them survive. Mr. Callahan offered them water first. Their hands shook as they reached for the wooden cups, the cold liquid soothing their dry throats. They drank slowly, savoring each drop, feeling it bring back some small measure of strength. Afterward, he offered food, simple bread and dried fruit. Their stomachs had gone days without proper meals, and even the smallest portions were a blessing. As they ate, they felt a fragile sense of comfort, a reminder that there could be safety even in the midst of chaos. While they rested, the girls explained more about their journey. They spoke of the desert, the obstacles they had overcome, and the courage that had kept them moving. They spoke of the bond they shared, of how they looked after one another and never gave up, even when the world seemed determined to crush them. Mr. Callahan listened with admiration. He had worked hard all his life, but he realized that true courage could be found not just in strength or skill, but in resilience, compassion, and love for others. The barn became a place of temporary safety. Mr. Callahan showed them corners where they could rest and hidden spaces where they could stay out of sight. He taught them to listen for sounds outside, to understand the wind and the movement of animals, and to trust their instincts. The girls learned quickly, their minds sharp from weeks of surviving in the desert. Even Najoni, though small and timid, began to understand how to stay safe. Together, they became a quiet, alert team, ready to face whatever danger might come next. As the day turned into evening, the girls began to relax a little more. They laughed softly at small jokes, shared memories of happier times, and whispered dreams of a future where they could live freely without fear. Yana told stories of the stars and the sky, how each one represented a family member watching over them from afar. The girls listened, mesmerized, letting themselves feel comfort in a world that had felt relentlessly cruel. Mr. Callahan also changed during this time. Seeing the girls, courage and resilience reminded him of the importance of kindness and compassion. He had faced many hardships, but he realized that protecting those who could not protect themselves was a true measure of strength. Each smile, each word of trust from the girls strengthened his resolve. He knew that harboring them was dangerous, but he also knew it was the right thing to do. In his heart, he felt that courage and morality were sometimes more important than safety. That night the barn was quiet except for the soft breathing of the girls as they slept. Mr. Callahan stayed nearby, keeping watch, his thoughts filled with concern and hope. He understood the risks, but he also knew that without someone to care for them, these young girls might not survive the harsh desert or the dangers of the world beyond. He felt a deep sense of responsibility, a bond forming between them that was built on trust, courage, and the fragile hope of survival. The girls dreamed of returning to their village, of reuniting with family, and of a life where fear did not dominate every step. They knew it might never happen, but the possibility gave them strength. They held on to each other through the night, whispering prayers and sharing small comforts. Even in their sleep, they stayed alert to the slightest sound, a testament to their survival instincts and the harsh realities they had endured. Morning brought new light and new challenges. The girls awoke slowly, stretching their tired bodies and preparing for another day in hiding. They understood that staying in one place could be dangerous, yet the barn had become a symbol of safety, a reminder that trust and kindness could exist even in a world filled with fear. They were grateful for Mr. Callahan, whose willingness to help had given them hope when all seemed lost. The day ahead was uncertain, but the girls felt a renewed sense of courage. They had survived the desert, evaded capture, and found a sanctuary, however temporary. Each step they took was guided by determination and hope. Mr. Callahan watched them with pride, knowing that these young girls carried within them a resilience that few could imagine. He promised himself to protect them as long as he could, and in doing so he became part of their story, a story of survival, courage, and the enduring power of human kindness. The sun had barely begun to rise, casting a pale light across the dusty barn floor. The 5 girls huddled together, exhausted from their long flight and the tense hours spent hiding. Their eyes, though tired, were alert, listening to every sound outside. The desert was quiet at this hour, but every shadow, every whisper of wind reminded them that danger could be anywhere. They had survived so far, but each day brought new challenges, and the reality of the world outside weighed heavily on their young shoulders. Mr. Callahan moved quietly around the barn, carrying a small basket of food. He had spent the night thinking about what he could do for the girls, weighing the risks against his conscience. Turning them away would be easy, safe, and lawful. But the sight of their wide, frightened eyes, the stories of loss they had shared, and the trust they had placed in him made it impossible to do so. He had made a promise to himself, silently, that he would protect them as long as they were under his roof. "Good morning," he said softly, trying to sound calm and reassuring. "I brought you something to eat." The girls looked up, blinking sleep from their eyes. Nijoni's small voice trembled as she whispered, "Thank you." Gianna gave a faint smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes but held a hint of hope. The others murmured thanks, their voices small but grateful. It was a simple gesture, but it carried more weight than the girls could express. For the first time in days, they felt that someone truly cared for their well-being. As they ate, Mr. Callahan watched them closely, noting how they moved and how their minds worked. Despite the fear that clung to them like a shadow, he could see strength in their expressions, courage in their eyes. He realized that these girls had been forced to grow up too quickly, to face challenges no child should endure, and yet they continued to survive. It was a humbling thought, and he felt a mix of admiration and responsibility. After breakfast, he sat down near them and spoke gently. "I know you are scared," he said, "and I know you have been through things that no one should have to endure. You are brave more than you may even realize, but you cannot stay here forever. The world outside is dangerous, and we need to plan carefully if you are going to survive." The girls listened intently, leaning in closer to hear every word. Their small hands clutched one another, a gesture of unity and trust. They had learned to depend on each other, and now they were beginning to see that someone else could also be a source of guidance and safety. Gianna spoke softly. "We don't want to cause trouble. We just want to be safe. We don't want anyone to get hurt." Mr. Callahan nodded. "I understand," he said, "and I will do everything I can to help you, but you must trust me and follow the rules I give you. Safety comes first. Hiding will not be enough. You will need to know how to protect yourselves, how to stay quiet, how to move without being seen." For the next several hours, the barn became a classroom of survival. Mr. Callahan showed the girls how to listen to the sounds of the desert, the shift of sand, the calls of birds, the distant movement of humans or animals. He taught them which areas of the ranch were safe to move through and which were dangerous. The girls absorbed every word, their young minds sharp and eager to learn. Even Nijoni, though shy and timid, began to understand the importance of awareness and caution. As the day went on, Mr. Callahan also allowed the girls to explore the barn and surrounding areas under his careful supervision. They discovered small nooks and hiding spots, spaces where they could rest or watch for approaching danger. They learned to move quietly, to step lightly on the creaking floorboards, and to remain invisible when needed. Each lesson, though practical, carried an emotional weight. The girls realized that their survival depended not only on physical skill, but on courage, patience, and trust in one another. During breaks, the girls shared stories of their past, of the village they had lost, and the family members they missed dearly. Their words were filled with sadness, yet also with determination. They remembered the songs, the laughter, and the games of childhood that had once seemed so ordinary. Sharing these memories brought a small sense of normalcy, a reminder that life could still hold beauty despite all the pain. Mr. Callahan listened quietly, offering comfort and encouragement when he could. By late afternoon, a plan began to take shape. The girls realized they could not remain in the barn indefinitely. Soldiers and other strangers could come at any time, and while Mr. Callahan was kind, the barn alone was not a permanent solution. They needed a strategy, a way to move forward without putting themselves or him at risk. Gianna, taking her role as leader, spoke with determination. "We must be ready. We cannot stay here forever, but we can learn from Mr. Callahan and prepare for the journey ahead." The other girls nodded in agreement, their fear tempered by a growing sense of purpose. For the first time since fleeing their village, they felt a spark of agency. They were no longer just fleeing from danger. They were learning, planning, and thinking ahead. Their survival depended on careful decisions, courage, and the bond they shared. The barn, once just a hiding place, had become a center of strategy and hope. Even as they worked on their plans, the girls also found moments of lightness and joy. They laughed softly at small jokes, whispered dreams for the future, and even found pleasure in simple tasks like helping to sweep the barn floor or arranging hay for comfort. These moments, though brief, reminded them that childhood had not been entirely lost. Life still had moments of beauty, even in the shadow of danger. As evening approached, Mr. Callahan sat down with them again. "You are learning quickly," he said, "and you are brave, but the most important thing is to stick together. Courage comes not from running alone, but from supporting one another and knowing that someone cares for you." The girls listened quietly, feeling the weight of his words. They understood that their bond, both with each other and now with Mr. Callahan, was their greatest strength. The night in the barn brought a mix of rest and vigilance. The girls took turns keeping watch, just as they had learned. Their eyes scanned the shadows, their ears listening to every movement outside. Though fear was still present, it no longer dominated them. They had learned to face it, to use it as a guide rather than a prison. And for the first time, they began to believe that survival was possible, that there could be a path forward even in a world that had seemed so cruel. During the quiet hours, Mr. Callahan reflected on the decision he had made. Hiding the girls was dangerous, but it was also necessary. He thought about the lessons they had already taught him, the resilience of the human spirit, the importance of compassion, and the courage that could exist in even the smallest and youngest among us. Protecting these children was more than an act of kindness. It was a reminder of what it meant to be truly human. Morning came again, bringing a soft golden light that filled the barn. The girls awoke with renewed energy, ready to face the day with determination. They knew challenges lay ahead, but they also knew that they had allies, guidance, and the strength that comes from unity. They were no longer just children fleeing danger. They were a team, learning, planning, and growing stronger with every passing moment. As they prepared for another day, Mr. Callahan reminded them of the importance of hope and careful planning. "The world outside is harsh," he said, "but you are stronger than you realize. You have already survived so much, and together, there is nothing you cannot face." The girls nodded, their faces reflecting a mixture of fatigue and determination. They had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to move forward despite it. The barn, once just a hiding place, had become a sanctuary, a school, and a home of sorts. Within its walls, the girls learned how to face the world with intelligence, strategy, and courage. Each lesson, each moment of shared trust strengthened them. And each night, as they lay together in the quiet darkness, they felt a growing belief that they could survive, that they could endure, and perhaps one day, they could find a place where fear did not dominate every step. In that barn, amidst the dust and hay, amidst the fear and uncertainty, a bond had been forged, one of trust, courage, and hope. The decision to help the girls had not been easy for Mr. Callahan, but it was the right one. And for the girls, the decision to trust him, to learn from him, and to cling to hope had become the first step toward survival, toward resilience, and toward the belief that even in the darkest times, humanity and kindness could shine through. Morning came quietly to the desert, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold. The 5 Apache girls awoke in the barn, their bodies stiff from sleeping on hay, but their spirits surprisingly strong. The events of the past days had taught them more about survival than they could have imagined. Each of them knew now that courage was not about fighting or running blindly. It was about thinking carefully, helping each other, and holding on to hope even when the world seemed cruel. Yana, the eldest, sat up first and peered out through a crack in the barn door. She scanned the horizon for signs of danger, remembering all the lessons Mr. Callahan had taught them. The desert appeared calm, almost peaceful, yet she knew appearances could be deceiving. She turned back to the others. "It's time," she said softly. "We have to move. We cannot stay here forever." The other girls nodded quietly, their faces a mixture of fear and determination. Mr. Callahan had helped them plan their escape carefully. He knew the risks of traveling through the desert, of encountering soldiers or wild animals, and of becoming lost in the vast, open land. Together, they had mapped a route that would take the girls to a safer area where they might find relatives or friends. It was not an easy journey, but it was the best chance they had. He packed small supplies for them, water, some bread, dried fruit, and a few items for protection. Each piece of food was carefully portioned to last for the long days ahead. Before leaving, the girls took a moment to gather themselves. They cleaned their faces as best they could, brushed the dust from their clothes, and held hands, forming a circle. "We will stay together," Yana whispered. "No matter what happens, we will not leave each other behind." Their bond, formed in fear and strengthened by trust, was unbreakable. In that moment, the barn was more than a shelter. It was a symbol of courage, guidance, and hope. The walk from the barn was slow and careful. The girls moved in silence, listening intently to every sound of the desert, the whisper of wind over sand, the distant cry of a hawk, and the faint rustle of leaves. They had learned from Mr. Callahan that silence could save lives, and each step was measured, deliberate, and quiet. Despite the fear that lingered, they felt a sense of empowerment. They were no longer just fleeing. They were moving with purpose, carrying the lessons they had learned and the hope that survival was possible. As the hours passed, the desert proved both beautiful and challenging. The sun climbed high, casting harsh shadows, and the heat became intense. They rested briefly in the shade of a large rock formation, sipping water slowly and sharing small bites of food. Even in these quiet moments, the girls remained alert, their eyes scanning the horizon for any signs of danger. The desert, though stunning, was unforgiving, and they knew that any lapse in caution could be costly. Along the way, the girls encouraged one another. When one stumbled over a rock or tripped on uneven ground, the others reached out to help. When their spirits wavered, they whispered words of encouragement and hope. "We can do this," Yana reminded them. "We are strong. We have survived so far, and we will keep going." Her words, though simple, carried power. They reminded the girls of their resilience, their courage, and the bond that had carried them through the worst days of their lives. By late afternoon, they reached a small stream, its clear water sparkling in the sunlight. They knelt beside it, letting the cool water flow over their hands and faces. The girls drank slowly, feeling the life-giving refreshment bring back strength and energy. For a moment, they allowed themselves to feel relief, savoring the small miracle of finding water in such a harsh landscape. Nijoni, the youngest, laughed softly as she splashed her hands in the stream, a sound so pure and joyful that it lifted the spirits of the others. Night began to fall, and the desert transformed under the pale glow of the moon. Stars twinkled above, and the girls felt a quiet sense of wonder at the beauty surrounding them. It reminded them of the stories their mothers and elders had once told, of courage, resilience, and guidance from ancestors. Each star seemed to represent someone watching over them, protecting them and giving them strength. They felt a connection not just to each other, but to a larger world that, despite its dangers, could still be full of kindness and hope. Traveling by night was safer, Mr. Callahan had explained, and the girls moved carefully through the darkness. They relied on their instincts and the lessons they had learned, how to listen to the desert, how to remain unseen, and how to support each other. The cold of the night was sharp, but their determination was stronger. They had faced fear before and survived, and now they were learning that courage was about persistence as much as bravery. Along the way, they encountered obstacles, a steep hill, a fallen tree, and patches of thick brush, but each challenge was met with teamwork and careful thought. The girls communicated silently with gestures and whispers, guiding each other and sharing the small victories of each obstacle overcome. Their confidence grew with each step, as did their sense of independence. Though they were still children, they had learned skills and lessons that made them wise beyond their years. By the early hours of morning, they arrived at a safer area, a small valley with sparse trees and a quiet stream. Here they could rest without fear of being discovered immediately. They set up a temporary camp, using blankets and the limited supplies they had carried. As they ate, their conversation shifted from fear to hope. They spoke of what they might find, of family they hoped was still alive, and of a future where fear no longer controlled every moment. Mr. Callahan had taught them the value of planning and patience, and the girls now saw its importance in practice. They realized that survival required more than just courage. It required thought, strategy, and trust. They had learned to observe, to listen, and to support one another. And as they sat together, sharing food and quiet conversation, they felt a profound sense of accomplishment. They had come so far, survived so much, and were still together. The days that followed were filled with careful travel, vigilance, and growing confidence. Each night they rested under the stars, drawing strength from one another and from the lessons Mr. Callahan had shared. Each day they moved closer to safety, trusting in their instincts and the skills they had developed. They remained alert to danger, but their fear was now balanced with hope, determination, and the belief that they could overcome whatever lay ahead. Finally, after days of cautious travel, they arrived at a small settlement where they recognized familiar faces, relatives, friends, and other members of the Apache community who had survived the raids. Tears of joy and relief flowed freely as they reunited, embracing loved ones and sharing their incredible journey. The girls felt a sense of completion, a reward for their courage and perseverance. The bond formed in fear and strengthened in survival had carried them through, and now it became a source of celebration and gratitude. Even after the reunion, the girls never forgot Mr. Callahan and the barn where their journey had begun. It had been a place of refuge, learning, and trust, a sanctuary that had given them the strength to continue. They carried the lessons learned there into their new lives, the value of kindness, the importance of courage, and the power of unity and trust. Though the journey had been long and perilous, it had shaped them into resilient, brave young women who had faced fear and come out stronger on the other side. In the end, the desert, the barn, and Mr. Callahan were more than just elements of a survival story. They were symbols of hope, humanity, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. The girls had learned that even in the darkest times, trust, courage, and kindness could light the way. And as they began to rebuild their lives, they carried not only memories of hardship but also the knowledge that survival was possible, and that hope, once found, could never be lost. The journey ahead would still be filled with challenges, but the girls now faced it with confidence and courage. They had survived the desert, the fear, and the uncertainty, and they knew that together, nothing could break the bond they had formed. The memory of the barn, of Mr. Callahan's kindness, and of the trust and courage shared among them would remain a guiding light for the rest of their lives. And so, with the morning sun casting long shadows over the valley, the 5 Apache girls continued their journey, not as frightened children running from danger, but as brave survivors moving toward a future filled with hope, possibility, and the knowledge that even in a harsh world, courage and kindness could carry them through anything.